Hey guys, thanks so much for checking us out. So excited to start our first night, our second part of our new sermon series in the book of Acts called Transformed. My best friend, Timothy Keller, says, grace transforms everything. And that's really the lens we're looking through in this series, is that what Jesus and the Spirit and the Father are doing in the book of Acts is changing everything. People, places, religion, they are on a tear. And we want to be transformed as we watch the work of God. So I hope you're excited. I'm pumped up, loving this, and hope it's a gift to your lives. This morning, we talked about one of the wildest transformations we'll ever see in the Bible. We looked at the terrorist, Saul of Tarsus, turns into Jesus' follower because Jesus is like your mind and you can't do anything about it. He was breathing out murderous threats. He was arresting people that belonged to Jesus. And then his life ends up that he is arrested by Jesus, and he'll live arrested several times for the cause of Jesus. And then his life is threatened by people that are hating on Jesus, just the same way he used to threaten people's lives that were into Jesus as well. The tables have turned, and this man is 100% on Team Jesus. So we really want to be caught up in the wonder of this story. So Acts 9, 1 to 31, either as an individual or as a group, please engage with this and let this story wow our hearts. Two thoughts tonight as we just kind of dig at the story deeper. My first thought that I couldn't shake out of my head was Saul is on his way to Damascus. He has authority from people in authority to go arrest men and women, anyone that belonged to Christ in this area of the community. And so again, Jesus interrupts. Jesus arrests this gentleman, Saul. But can you imagine what would have happened if it didn't play out like that? Can you imagine Damascus if Saul went in breathing murderous threats? His intention, right? His anger, his hatred. It would have been so discouraging. It would have been so dangerous to be one of Jesus's people. But instead of that, what God has proved in Acts chapter 9 is that, one, he is in total control, and he can take his most fiercest enemies and put them on their knees easily. Saul knows he's in way over his head. He's like, who are you, Lord? And he's like, I'm Jesus. Stop persecuting me and my people. It's such a good thing to remember that God holds us. That God can still God can still work like that. Also, we want to kind of pause and understand that in verse 4 of Acts 9, Paul's like, hey, who are you? Speaking to our Lord. And he's like, I'm Jesus. I'm the one you're persecuting. And realistically, Jesus is off the scene. Jesus is not on earth. Jesus isn't necessarily being persecuted, but at the same time, he very much is, because anything that's happening to Jesus's people is happening to him. I remember a professor a couple years ago telling me that when he realized that Christ feels his pain, especially when it comes to rejection, especially when it comes to pushback over his faith, that it was such a freeing realization to know, like, wow, Jesus identifies with me at very deep levels. And I don't know if I ever caught that prior to that moment in class. And I was like, wow, Jesus felt personally persecuted when his people were harmed. And that's a version of Christ that I want to celebrate and I want to hold dear to my life. And I hope that you do too. We're not alone. God sees our pain, and especially if we're being rejected or hindered because of our faith in Jesus, like God knows how to work there. So that is a gift, and I hope that we can be encouraged by that. So as, again, an individual or as a group, we hop into Acts 9. I'd love to remind us that what we're seeing played out in a very dramatic fashion in the life of Saul is something that's happened in each and every one of our lives if we're believers in Jesus Christ. That same type of arrest, that same type of revelation where God allows us to see how good he really is. So I really thank God for that. Let's kick around some discussion questions. I have 6. I understand if we don't get to all of them for the sake of time, but let's kick around as many as possible. Number 1, imagine the experience of the believers in Damascus. That should be a period and not a question mark. How would we respond in this situation? I mean, prior to Jesus intervening, a massive threat was coming. And God just changed that. Like, would we welcome Paul? Would we be like, hey, I'm sorry, I call him Paul because he's the Apostle Paul after his name Saul. But would we welcome Saul? Or would we be like, Saul, why don't you just stay over there? Number 2, this is verses 17 to 19. We see that Paul was blinded in this experience with Jesus. So the question is, can we identify the moment that we were blind towards God and he opened our eyes and allowed us to see him? For some people, salvation is very drastic. You could give the minute, the day, the hour, right? You could give all the details. For some people, you could be like, I couldn't even tell you within like a 5-year span of when God really became real. I just know he became real. So our stories vary. But can you pinpoint like, oh, now I finally see God? Question number 3, this is verse 15 and 16. We see God's purpose for Saul. It's very unique. My question is, wow, Nate, help me not put question marks going forward. Yeah, my bad, guys. I didn't proof this well. Does God have a purpose for you and I? If he saved us, like, was it with was it with a purpose? And if it was, is it generic? Is it specific? Or is it both? Like, what do we, what's our take on that? Number 4, have we been able to process that Jesus feels our rejection and persecution? Have you lost a friend? Have you lost a family member? Has someone in your workplace just like railed against you simply because you love Jesus? That happens to people often. How does this bring grace and comfort in those moments? Number 5, Saul gets converted and starts preaching Jesus, like instantly. It's important to know that Saul was trained in the scriptures from a child, so he was religious by nature. It makes sense. But in your story, in my story, how can we see God using our experiences, our past, to help people see Jesus? Does that make sense? Like, what is part of your story that helps you tell the story of Christ? And number 6, this will hopefully lead us into a time of prayer. Is there anyone that we have given up on? They'll never meet Jesus. They hate the gospel. Their heart is so hard. My friends, we're seeing that in Saul the terrorist. So how does this story give us hope for people? And how can this encourage our hearts to keep praying for people to meet Jesus? So I know that's a lot of questions. Again, connect with the ones that lead to great conversation. Thank you so much for checking us out. Thank you for hopping in Acts chapter 9. I hope it really is a gift to your life. I hope you have a great week. Bye for now.